Welcome to Life is for Living. I'm your host, Kylie Buckley, and we're with David Riddell today speaking on fear, anxiety, panic attacks, which are all, or can be, mainly emotionally based. David, you're just talking to me about five letters that you can use, everybody, and write this down that you can go back to when you need it. It's REBTC. David, would you like to speak into that, as we were just talking a moment ago?
Well, if we're speaking about fear, we're talking about an emotion. After the emotion comes the action or reaction. But before the emotion comes the self talk. And the self talk goes like this: this is bigger than I am. I am threatened by this. There is a sense of danger here. I'm in danger. This is going to be more of the past. I don't want more of the past. I'm about to lose a best friend or trust or credibility or material possessions. There's definitely a threat, and I do feel afraid. And before that comes what we value, the assumption that this is valuable to me. This marriage is valuable to me. This child's trust is valuable to me. My health is valuable to me. My money is valuable to me. My time is valuable to me. So every time something we value is threatened, then we experience fear. And Christ himself advised us not to fear him who can take our very lives from us. Because although our life is valuable, it's not actually the main thing. The main thing is our integrity, the integrity of our soul. And the main thing is to be trustworthy. And the main thing is to be a good steward of what God has given us. But if we go through life valuing the wrong things, valuing clothing, valuing material possessions, valuing everybody's approval, becoming a pleaser, then we're going to live in a constant sense of threat. And anger can be the result of that sense of threat. And fear is the number one cause of anger. And so underneath violence, there is anger. Underneath anger, there is fear. Underneath fear, there is a sense of the loss of security. And you'll notice, for example, that all wars are started and fueled by a sense of fear, a sense of insecurity. And as a result of that, wars rapidly escalate. Why? Because they run who have no one chasing them because they're afraid. My hope is that as a result of listening to this little broadcast, people can reconsider what it is that they really value so much that they're frightened of losing it. Because if until they address that, they're like a person trying to make their own bed up without getting out of it. You've really got to get out of your bed to make it up properly. And you've really got to stand back from your thinking and self-talk and say, what is it I'm so afraid of losing, before you can address the source of your panic, the source of your anxiety, and the source of your stress. Because after all stress is fear-driven and fear-motivated. And REBT just reminds us, as a psychological modality, that first the rational, then the emotional, then the behavior, and the consequence. And understanding those five letters means that you can work backwards to the real cause of the anxiety.
So to work backwards to the real cause of the anxiety, just take us through that so that people can write this down. Again, I know you're going over it, but it's important.
So the consequences were I drove too fast, or I abused my child, or I was disrespectful to my spouse. The consequences can be divorce, alienation, accident. The consequences can be like the person who's afraid of the bee that flew into the car. The consequences of their fear is that they are the one that gets stung in their desperate attempts to get rid of it. And whereas the person who's not afraid of the bee sits peacefully and is not in danger of creating the very thing that they fear. That's a consequence, but that's the result of the behavior. And the behavior, of course, is the result of the anxiety. And you say things you regret in your moment of panic. You do things you regret in your moment of panic. And so you're basically in a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. And the behavior is the result of the emotion. It could be stress, it could be fear, it could be panic, anxiety of any sort. And you can even get to the point where you're afraid of becoming afraid. You're afraid of that anxiety. And there's an old maxim in psychology that says the fear of fear can only result in the escalation of fear, always resulting in a panic attack. And so I'm not afraid of an adrenaline overdose. Some people have a hair trigger adrenal gland. I suffered from that for many years. I would get a shot of adrenaline if anything unexpected happened or anything pressed on my bruises or my unbearable feelings. And as a result, I was prone to panic. And during the time of panic, I did many things and said many things that I regretted later. But I realize now, in fact, that I was afraid of fear, and that was increasing the adrenaline overdose. If you've got a hair trigger adrenal gland, it'll make you sick. And somewhere in your body, the body keeps score. And if you're getting too much adrenaline, you're going to end up with some kind of autoimmune issue, inflammation, and rogue inflammation, we call it, can result because adrenaline in massive doses is highly toxic. In fact, it's what we use to put our pets down when they've reached their last days, just a burst of adrenaline. And so I determined to attempt to live adrenaline free. And in doing that, I was following scripture's adjuration to be anxious for nothing. And I have learnt to live fear free now. And as a result, I've also learnt to live anger free because most anger is based in fear. And so without fear and without anger, there's always peace. And I do encourage your listeners to make it a goal to live fear free, to be anxious for nothing, and to live anger free. Because contrary to popular mistaken opinion, anger is not an essential part of our lives. We could say that in life, frustration is compulsory, but anger is always voluntary. What makes the difference? The answer is the presence of fear.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because anger is like built up emotion, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it comes, bottles up and then comes out.
Well, stress accumulates, you see, and so does resentment. And eventually we're going to have to do something to clear the air. And whether that be a calm, dignified negotiation or whether it be somebody just losing it and saying things they'll regret forever, that depends on the culture of the family, I suppose. But I find myself that anger is a deeply misunderstood emotion. And for me, anger is certainly emotional energy, but what we do with it, we can harness it or we can spill it, has severe consequences sometimes.
Yes. Okay, so with somebody that does have an anger problem, that can't control how they, you know, when they manifest themselves, have you got any tips on that that can help people to perhaps capture the feeling before it comes to that outburst?
Well, before they have the pain of anger and the outcry or the squeal of having their bruise pressed on, they need to do a summary of their bruises because everybody has an unbearable feeling somewhere, everybody has a bruise somewhere. And any time that bruise is pressed on, there's going to be a squeal, an emotional squeal of outrage. And that's where anger begins, right there. So my advice is to heal the bruises, and then you won't be prone to the anger that follows. People do argue that we are to be angry as long as we don't sin. It's a very bad interpretation of that scripture. So I point them to James where it says, the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God.
Mm. Because it's something you're not in control of, isn't it? Anger is it's you just let loose. Well, that's been my experience on it. It's like they're not even aware
Well,
sometimes.
in the sense that if somebody presses on your bruise, you're not really in control of the reaction. And so instead of trying to control the action, why don't you heal the bruise?
Yes. Yeah, well, yep, 100%.
That's
So
what I'm here for.
exactly. So and David, you have living wisdom counsellors throughout our country and in Australia as well, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, several countries of the world I've trained counsellors, the living wisdom way. And so living wisdom practitioners have been trained in my system. And yes, there's a number of people now who offer Skype and Zoom and telephone services. The world's a big place, and it's not feasible to go visit these gurus. So just check them out. And in fact, if you email livingwisdom.co.nz, you can get a referral to somebody in your district, providing you tell us where you are, of course.
Right. So there you go, everybody. There are places throughout our country and Australia. And if you are not in one of those particular areas, you can always do a Skype with one of David's counsellors, or even David himself, I suppose. You are available, but I know you have a massive waiting list for people to talk with you.
Generally, people can, if they're patient, talk to me within 50 days of making a connection. But in the meantime, we can refer them to somebody for more immediate help.
Yes, excellent. Okay, so look, let's leave it there for this session of Life is for Living.
Thank you, Kylie.
Bye, everyone.